Hi, welcome back. It's Colleen Schmidt, and we're going to once again talk astrology. Today, I want to look at not so much the asteroids, although it still applies, still asteroid astrology, but I'm going to talk today about the dial, what we use as a tool to help decipher all those asteroids quickly and easily. Okay, so today, before we begin, there are examples on my website at www.divinationcounselingservice.org. And if you're interested in even reading further about it, there's another article on it. Okay? I'm going to start off with reviewing what a dial is. Okay? So it's a tool, we know, we just said that, used by astrologers. It actually, I believe, might have originated in Hamburg School in Germany, but it's used and very, very popular here in the United States, particularly for those astrologers that like to apply a lot of different things in their astrology work. So I'm talking about fixed stars and centaurs and black holes, as well as asteroids and trans-Neptunians. So there's a lot of things that we can work with as astrologers, but it can all become overwhelming if you try to read that in a chart. A chart, a wheel, is still very, very valid. It's the greatest way to get the feel for the signs and the house placements. And a lot of times people who use a dial, like myself, I'll do the wheel first. I'll look at the wheel. I'll get a good, overview of what the wheel is saying, and then I'm going to jump right to my dial, because the dial does the math for me. So that way I have one where I can look at the overview of the chart. That's the wheel. But with the dial, I can get into those aspects and those conversations that are going on and that add detail to that overall chart. So just moving on here, with the dial, okay, just to review it, you're using, in our case, a 90-degree dial. But before we get started, let me say that there is a such thing as a 360-degree dial, of course our 90-degree dial, a 45-degree dial, as well as a 30 and a 60-degree dials. So, of course, they're looking at more trines, sextiles. They're looking at different aspects. But each of these dials brings something to the table. There's something to be gleaned from any one of them. But the 90 is the most popular. So that's what we're going to start with today. Just a little review. The left side of a dial is the cardinal signs: Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, Aries. And they take up that first third of that dial. The bottom of the dial, or if you will, the second third, is your fixed signs. That would be Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, and Scorpio. All those signs are jumbled into that 30-degree section. The final 30 degrees will then be the mutables: Pisces, Virgo, Sagittarius, Gemini. And they're grouped together, so that way, if you have something in Libra and you have something in Gemini and you have something in Aries, you might not think about them all connecting together, but if you're on a dial, you might, because they may show up in the same axis. And what an axis is on a dial would be the 90 degree, the 45, the 2230, and either looking at 6730 or sometimes referred to as 730 mutable. Those are the axis points for the Aries point. We all have those. They are the same for every individual. So I always start with that. But realize you have a sun axis. You have a moon axis. You have a Mercury axis. So all of this, every 2230 from the sun, they're all a part of that conversation. Okay? So I am working with the Aries point because as somebody who does a little bit of predictive work for the world, it's an easy way to write articles because, again, everybody has one. It's also an easy way to learn and study asteroids, trans-Neptunians, centaurs, whatever it is you're very interested in, because it's running across the world stage. There's no way you can miss it. A few of us will be directly affected by those Aries points, but many of us are not as directly affected, but you're still indirectly affected because we all have them. So I like to start and work with those. So today we're going to look at midpoints. Midpoints are what they sound like. You can do midpoints on a 360 wheel. It just would take you a little bit because there's a lot of math involved. I've done it. It's rewarding work, but if the dial does it for me, then I'm going to save the time and spend more time in my interpretation of what it is I'm looking at. Okay? So the midpoint is that center point between two other points, okay? We could use points that are relative to one another, or we could use points that are not. And I'll give you an example. I used Hades Chronos in my written example because it's a phenomenon that's going on right now. Now they are conjunct, okay? They still have midpoints, but they are conjunct. Okay, which just really briefly, Hades then of course stands for evil, illness, deterioration, wasting. It's a few unsavory things. And then we have Chronos, which is of course the higher ups, authority figures. And we know that everywhere in the world, well, if you don't, you should look out because everywhere in the world people are unhappy with their leaders. You could be unhappy with your boss. There could be, it's not just the sexual abuses by like higher ups in churches, although that's very much a part of this. But this aspect, this conjunction, if you will be going on, this trans-Neptunian conjunction will be going on until 2030. So we're looking at about another 11 years of bringing down, in many ways, people that have criminal intent, that maybe even got where they are because of using their criminal ways, okay? One of the interesting ways to look at midpoints would be to, let's use Chronos Hades again. Let's take someone who has Chronos Hades equals Sun. That doesn't sound good, does it? It's not. Okay. However, yes, it can be. They might be a doctor. That is also a marker for a doctor. Just as a person who has Hades Mercury. Well, there's another one. Okay, Hades Mercury aspects, Hades Mercury in terms of midpoints, they can be markers for astrologers, believe it or not. Although it is still mistakes while we're speaking. I make enough of them. I've had to do enough copies of the video web clips to know that I definitely have the marker of an astrologer just because of the mistakes I make verbally. But in each case, there is always a good and a bad side. So even though we're looking at something like Hades Chronos, it is medicine. Okay, so while we're making all of these developments to these criminals that are our leaders and people who are in charge or in high places, and we find out there's a criminal element there, we're also going to be making some major breakthroughs in our health industry. The curing of people with AIDS, which has happened recently, is but one, I hope, but one of many examples I think we're going to see over the next 11 years. Because that's one of the good things that will happen as a result of the Hades Chronos. But Hades Chronos also means that a lot of leaders are being indicted or being looked at. And we already know that's true. I'm here in the United States. We have somebody who got exonerated but didn't. And, you know, I happen to know as an astrologer that there's a lot more to come. So I'm not saying he's guilty, he's not guilty. I don't think that's really the relevant question here. I think the relevance is that when we have people in positions of authority, we cannot assume that they're good people, because we're going to be learning some very hard and cruel lessons in the next 11 years regarding just that. These are not people that have necessarily should or could be trusted. Okay? So moving on. When you look at a midpoint, you're looking at 2 points that are the middle of whatever it is that they're coming together in the middle, okay? Now, this could be describing somebody's Mars or somebody's Mercury. As you put together these 2 midpoints, it also gives you a little bit of description, just like we saw with the Chronos Hades equals Sun. That guy could be a kingpin. He could be a doctor, but he could be a kingpin. He could be a leader of criminals. Okay? So the opposite ends. And oftentimes I tell people, look in the chart, you'll figure the rest of it out. I mean, a lot of times, especially if you read asteroids, you're going to be able to figure out whether that person's a kingpin or whether or not they're a doctor. I think it's going to become rather obvious. With that said, when I do predictive work, I like to pull in those midpoints. I think it was about a month ago, I actually did an article on how Neptune was pulled into the Aries point via the sun and the moon by way of midpoint, because Neptune happened to be the midpoint with the sun and the moon coming together to the Aries point. Okay? And that is not necessarily a very good, it's not good for clarity. It's definitely muddied waters. It definitely will leave a lot of people stymied. In the case of some people, they may be dealing with deception of some kind, because Neptune is deceptive. Neptune is also compassion, so it can also be days of compassion, but it can also be days of being disillusioned. So with that said, I hope to see you all here again, and I wish you all a very good day. Until next time, bye-bye.